All right. Well, I'm Joan Towsey, and I'm here to welcome you as part of the League's regular Keeping It Local series. We have evolving police practices in our community. We hope to gain insights into evolving police practices in our current environment. As such, we're delighted to welcome two local law enforcement executives, like Dr. Michael Schlosser from the Police Training Institute at the University of Illinois, and Alice Cary, the Chief of Police and Executive Director of Public Safety at the U of I. For those of you not familiar with the League, although it looks like most of you are, I'll just give a quick spiel. The League of Women Voters of Champaign County is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. And we are celebrating our 100th year of this chapter. Other than the presenters, please mute yourself. We have a member moderating the chat room, so you can enter any questions there, which we will try to get to in the last 20 minutes of the program. Let me first maybe mention some abbreviations you may hear. And if the abbreviations are used, it may help us make the most of our 60 minutes. So the PTI is the Police Training Institute at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, established in 1955 by state statute. And then we'll hear a little bit more about it from Michael. These shouldn't come as a big surprise, but CPD is the Champaign Police Department, UPD, the Urbana Police Department, and the U of I PD would be the University of Illinois Police Department. Another one that I think may be used a bit tonight is CIT, which stands for Crisis Intervention Team. That's a program, it's a community partnership of law enforcement, mental health and addiction professionals, individuals who live with mental illness and or addiction disorders, their families and other partners to improve community responses to mental health crises. While CIT programs are known for CIT trained officers, successful programs also focused on improving the crisis response system, advocating for needed services, and strengthening partnerships across the community. ILETSB, or to be known perhaps as the board, stands for the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board. I have no idea if Michael or Alice will use that one, but I threw it in. And now let me start by sharing a bio for Director Michael D. Schlosser, Ph.D., is director of the University of Illinois Police Training Institute. He retired as a lieutenant from the Rantoul Police Department in 2004. Dr. Schlosser has conducted and collaborated in cross-disciplinary research projects at the University of Illinois and is credited for his innovative ideas toward police reform. He has authored dozens of articles, co-authored the book, The Power Manual, a step-by-step guide to improving police officer wellness, ethics, and resilience, made media appearances and given over 100 presentations across the country on topics such as police tactics, police training, use of force, de-escalation techniques, control and arrest tactics, the intersection of police and race, diversity, police officer wellness, and police family wellness. Michael will now give an overview and address some previously submitted topics and questions for about 15 minutes, and then I will introduce Chief Cary, and she will do the same. We will have about 15 to 20 minutes of questions at the end. So Michael, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All righty. To start with, just talking about the University of Illinois Police Training Institute, there's 7 different academies in Illinois, and departments can choose which academy they send officers to. But if an academy is full, they have to send them to a different one. And we usually have a waiting list of about 80 to 100. And we are very unique in our training compared to other academies across the United States. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of academies that are paramilitary. It's almost like going to a boot camp. And the training, the way they provide training is a lot different than the way we do, although there's a lot of academies around the United States that are doing similar things to what we're doing. So there are some things that kind of set us apart. And for an example, a traditional academy, they might be paramilitary. They might have their training in single blocks of instructions by week. Here's your week of law, here's your week of vehicle code, here's your week of control tactics, here's your week of this. And then at the very end, after all those weeks, they put together some scenarios, and you have to remember everything you've learned up to that point. So what we do is we integrate scenarios beginning in the third week of training, where we are constantly providing, you're learning things in the classroom, you're practicing, you're having, meaningful discussions and group discussions and facilitations and things like that. You're learning things, and then you're actually practicing them in a scenario, and then you learn some more and you're practicing in a scenario, and you're learning more and so on. And it's throughout. That way we can build upon things, so that, to begin with, the scenarios might be, not very complicated, but they're learning certain skills to have those down before they move on to things that are gradually getting more complex and getting maybe, higher end, as far as danger and things like that. So everything is spread out, throughout the entire 14 weeks. The other things that kind of, the other thing we do is the state right now is requiring 40 hours of scenario-based training, and we provide 84 hours of scenario-based training. So we provide extra training than is required, because the things that we teach, especially if we're talking about certain strategies and tactics, not just arrest, but de-escalation training. And when I teach the de-escalation training, I'm actually not just teaching de-escalation training. I'm teaching what I call non-escalation and de-escalation training, because how you talk to somebody to begin with can prevent things from escalating. However, if they do escalate, we need those skills to de-escalate. So they are practicing these skills through dozens of a variety of different scenarios the entire time they're here. And so I think that is key. And we also really promote, non-escalation to de-escalation, and community policing is a big thing. And it's not just, here's your class on de-escalation, here's your class on community policing, here's your class on ethics. These are kind of spread and filtered throughout as many classes as we can. So we're kind of revisiting them and explaining to them in different ways by different instructors. The other thing that I brought into the academy when I became director is I realized that we really weren't doing enough as far as understanding how to police in a multiracial society. And that was pretty much the biggest part of my dissertation. And so we've been experimenting and continue to bring in new ideas on policing in a multiracial society. And I've worked with various professors on campus. It began with somebody named Helen Neville, who's a rock star professor, and I learned a lot from her. And so we've been bringing that in. We also brought in LGBTQ ally training. And I think that's very important. That's something else that wasn't mandated by the state. And so we brought that in, and I brought in a class, and it wasn't well perceived initially by the old training board. And I'm just going to be right up front about this. So after I earned my PhD, I decided, man, I love school. I'm going to go back and get another degree. I don't know why I did that, but I told my wife I'm done. So I promised her. But I went back and I got a master's degree after that in legal studies. And I took a class called Wrongful Convictions. And it really opened my eyes to understanding that so many people are incarcerated and they didn't commit this crime. And as I kept, became obsessed with this and reading through all these different cases and learning more and more about it, and actually meeting a lot of wrongfully convicted people that have been exonerated, I learned that, sure, sometimes it's the police were bad, they did this, they coerced a confession, etc. But I also learned that a lot of times it was simply the police officer not practicing best practices, whether it be for a show up, a lineup, an interview. And a lot of times, we realize that if an officer kind of gets in their mind who did this crime, they get tunnel vision. And that tunnel vision kind of keeps them to focusing on that person, and actually new information is coming in that just might show you somebody else committed the crime. And so this was a big one for me, and it's so powerful. And of course, we have lecture, but I have an exoneree come in and they speak for about an hour and answer questions for about an hour. And it's just, it really, opens the eyes to the recruit officers. But the thing I'm proud about that is, initially it was not that well accepted, and I don't know why, but it was a different different time, I guess. And so what's happened now is the Illinois Law Enforcement Training Standards Board, ILETSB, I'm going to use the acronym. It's just so the training board has gone through a lot of changes, and they're much more progressive. And so I continued to push for this class. And as of January, this class is going to be mandatory for every academy, for every recruit or cadet in Illinois. And I do this in conjunction with the Illinois Innocence Project at the University of Illinois Springfield. So the other thing that I think is important too is, not only are we not military, doesn't mean it's not stress, because the stress is going to be in the scenarios, with realistic scenarios where the role players are trained on tactics and de-escalation and non-escalation, so they know how to respond, right? But so not only, are we not, paramilitary, we're also, and I don't know if any other academies like this, but we are a trauma-informed academy. And if you think about it, I go in there on that first day and I have 100 recruits in front of me. And we realize that, with that many people, that many young people, and some not as young, coming through the academy, that, how many of them have experienced some type of trauma in their life? They're going to be going through scenarios and taking courses involving, child abuse, domestic abuse, and things that may trigger something. So we have plans in place if those things are triggered. And so I just think we have a little bit of a unique approach. We've developed years ago scenarios on interacting with people with developmental disabilities or mental health issues. Years ago, I brought in scenarios involving officers having to intervene. We have a law now, duty to intervene. We shouldn't have had to have that law, but we do, and it was needed. But even before all these new legislative statutes and things came out, it's like we realized that, hey, we want officers to know that they must intervene. So they have scenarios where somebody's using excessive force or doing something else wrong, and they have the obligation to intervene. So that's kind of what we do, what we do in a nutshell. And so, but there have been changes over the years that are very positive in the curriculum. We're going from 14 weeks to 16 weeks beginning next year. It's bringing in more mandated scenario-based training. It's bringing in more crisis intervention training. It's bringing in more learning more about mental health issues, and not just for police interactions, but for police officers themselves. Because as much as, officers are going to have critical incidents, they're going to have vicarious trauma from the constant bad things that are happening. And so if we keep these things in mind, it's important that these are brought in. And just to give you an idea of, even though the departments have plans in place, they've got teams in place, they want everybody to get help for any issues they might be having, there still is a stigma. And I'll just give you an example of why I realized that. So during COVID and the social unrest, and a lot of, defund the police, and a lot of the officers around the state were going through, some anxiety and some depression. And I had dozens over that time period call and talk to me. They're like, Mike, I just need to talk to somebody. And so there's a lot of times they're still not comfortable going to their own agency and seeking help. And so we're still really trying to push that. And that's, something that's very important to, all law enforcement officers. So.
Okay, well, we have someone very busy with questions here, which we'll wait till the end. So thank you, Michael. At this point in time, let me introduce Alice Cary, Executive Director of Public Safety and Chief of Police at the University of Illinois Police Department. She has more than 35 years of progressive law enforcement experience, which hardly seems considering how young she looks online here, spanning literally from coast to coast. Alice began her law enforcement career in Michigan before her journey took her to Wyoming, the University of Oregon, University of Maryland, Baltimore, and now here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for the past years. She's worked in just about every capacity of law enforcement, including as a police officer, sheriff's deputy, state trooper, and as a criminal investigator in the office of the district attorney. Chief Cary is a self-described change agent and has demonstrated a talent for developing and implementing innovative strategies for solid community partnerships that respect diversity. She can often be seen around campus with her law enforcement therapy dog, Archie. So Alice, with perhaps Archie outside, will address some questions that we've given you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Let me start out by, explaining maybe the differences between university campus policing and municipal policing. Although, there's some practical skills that both, officers do to conduct business. University Police Department, we're still prepared to deal with the same kind of types of crimes that, municipalities deal with. And we handle those the same way. We get a lot of the same calls. But we have a campus of a population of about 70,000 people, and plus tens of thousands people that come to campus, for sporting events or community members that pass through every day. So we're basically a city within a city, and we deal with the same societal issues that come with having that kind of population. I think the main difference, is the attitude and recognition that many people we deal with are younger people and still are developing and learning how to be an adult in a very complex world these days, especially. So I don't really think we're more lenient, but I do think there's an expectation that we spend a little more time when we approach people and explain, why we're doing the things we're doing.
You want to see this being?
Hello?
I think.
Sorry. Not
That's
sure
okay.
what that was, but please continue, Alice.
Weldon Fields, could you mute him or?
He's
Yeah.
muted now.
Okay. So anyway, as far as campus policing is concerned, we do a lot of education. So we get out in front, do some outreach and preventative work with our population. And plus we have different resources available, in terms of how we hold people accountable. For example, more minor issues, involving our students, we can refer them to student discipline instead of issuing a citation or getting someone into the legal system. So there's a little bit of differences there as far as the university campus policing and municipal policing. I really want to segue into an initiative called REACH. REACH is Response, Evaluation, and Crisis Help. This is a collaborative team that brings together police officers and social workers. And so they're paired in a single patrol car to meet the needs of community members that may be suffering from mental health crisis or experiencing any type of mental health situations that this co-responder model can respond to. So in mental health emergencies, police departments historically have been tasked with dealing with these issues. And we're not trained like social workers. We're trained in the CIT to help de-escalate and find where we can assist in that situation at that time. But even though we're trained in crisis intervention, the expertise no way matches that of a social worker who is qualified to make the clinical assessments on scene. And by pairing a police officer and a social worker in a single unit, we can respond to emergencies and we can quicker deliver personnel to help assess the individual's mental health issues. and at the same time providing for a safe environment. So our officer's main concern is to make sure the scene is safe, and then the social worker will take over and assess with that individual that may be in crisis. And so that's very essential for the safety of our bystanders and our social worker. So what we're finding when police officers are alone and are forced to determine, someone's mental health, they run out of options. And so they end up taking the individual to the hospital out of abundance of caution. And sometimes the hospital will assess that individual and they send them back out, and they're not getting the wraparound care that the individual needs to help get through their situations. So that's when our social workers come in. So they do the assessment, and they can connect that person to the specific resources that they need to help them get better. And so that helps reduce the hospitalizations. But I'm happy to, mention that our therapy canines are kind of involved in this as well. We call the program iPause, which is providing assistance with support. So these are therapy dogs. They're specially trained therapy dogs, and they've been a great asset since they've been introduced here at the University of Illinois. And word has really spread quickly. Our dogs and our canine teams are very busy. We get multiple requests every day from different campus programs as a way to help students de-stress, especially during midterms and finals. That helps them, interaction with the dogs helps them get out of their heads for a little bit. And so these dogs are also an icebreaker. I walk Archie around campus quite often. People are very curious about the dog, and they'll start a conversation about Archie or asking questions about him. And really, it's the conversation that leads up the leash, so it's a great community engagement tool. And it really starts that conversation about mental health as well. And our therapy dogs have also gone on calls for service and been a great asset. Multiple times our therapy dogs have played a really big role. One occasion, the Urbana Police Department was called to a man with a knife that was sitting at a bus stop. He was threatening others and himself with that knife. And Urbana Police Department did a great job de-escalating and by talking to him. And when they were talking to him, they learned that he was very fond of dogs. So Urbana Police knew that we had therapy dogs, so they called one of our therapy dogs teams, Alex Tran and Lollipop, to the scene. And so they had the conversation and they made an agreement. If you drop the knife, you can pet Lollipop. So he did. So that was a great resolution, and having that therapy dog on scene in that instant. But our dogs have been deployed, at fire scenes to help, the victims of those situations. Our dogs are been, deployed for, officer involved, on duty deaths and helping comfort families. So there's a multitude of things that our therapy dogs can do. In addition to providing that service to our community, they also provide comfort for our police officers. And I've seen the difference when Archie comes into a briefing and the officers are kind of, focused on their day, and kind of gets them out of the mindset a little bit and kind of loosens them up before they hit the street. So they get a chance to engage with Archie or the other therapy dogs. And that really does help. There's studies that show that, that helps, the officers change their mood when they're interacting with a therapy dog. So there's a lot of good things that come from dogs. And so we're seeing a lot more communities throughout the country getting therapy dogs for this reason. So with that, I kind of want to segue into our partnership with the School of Social Work. We are currently partnering with the School of Social Work on a project funded through the Chancellor's Office, a call to action to address racism and social injustice. It's a research program. So what this project does is it takes lived experiences of our community members with respect to race and hate, and then uses those to create simulations with police officers to promote constructive conversations about racial healing. So it's early in this project. I don't have a lot of specifics. We're still in the middle of it, but it's a great partnership, and I see really good things coming out of this too. And then I really want to talk about the campus town. I think a lot of people have heard about the campus town agreement between Champaign and the U of I Police Department. We've taken over this jurisdiction between Neal and Wright Streets from Springfield down to Windsor, mainly because at the time Champaign was short on staff, and they couldn't really fully service campus town as they once did. And we were in the area anyway, so we thought, well, there's a lot of our students that are in this area, so we made the agreement with Champaign so that we could help them and help our students in our campus community. But since taking that over August 1st, we've been very busy, but we're happy to report no major issues. So our officers and our non-sworn staff have done an excellent job in handling the additional workload. And of course, the city has helped pay for some new staffing, so that helps our staff to be able to take those extra calls for service. But in addition to that, we've added community service officers to our department, which are non-sworn, and they're not police officers, but they're able to take some low-level calls for service, like reports like vandalism or theft, or lost wallets, or those type of calls for service that typically go to police officers. So they're taking a lot of the workload off police officers, so that they can spend more time being visible and doing proactive work to prevent crime. So in addition to that, in doing a lot of outreach in the campus town area, we've made contact with over 100 businesses and 100 business owners in that area, so that we can understand their concerns and their issues, and we're partnering with that to be proactive and working on those. So overall, since taking that over, it's going great so far. We really want to emphasize that the example of great working relationships, and that's working with Champaign and other municipalities, so that there's strength in numbers. And so having those relationships has really helped us be successful here at the campus. And that's, not to forget Mike and his crew at PTI. I mean, having that right here in town is really a great relationship. I mean, a lot of our officers teach at PTI, and we learn from other different departments from across the state that come to PTI. So it's nice having that right here in town, where we send our new recruits to PTI. So we know they're close, we know they're in good hands, and they know they're getting the top training, throughout the country, really, because Mike's done a wonderful job in being progressive in how we teach our new recruits. So it's good to have that shared information and collaboration with our partners. Like a recent example, we introduced the automatic license plate readers. And so the county and Champaign have done the same. So we share access and information with all of the LPRs, and we share the resources there to help us solve some cases. And it's been a really good partnership. In addition to our law enforcement partnerships, we partner with other community partners like Rosecrans, and we utilize the services of Courage Connection, Races, See You at Home, and others. So they all have a really good nexus to public safety, and we really appreciate their help and their partnership. And so we're also engaging with our local legislators. I mean, I think everyone has heard about the Safety Act and that legislation. So there's still a lot of questions on how that's going to roll out, and some questions to iron out. so that we're all on the same page. So I think there's a little bit of anxiety of what that looks like, but we're partnering with, our state's attorney and other local law enforcement partners to make sure we're clear on what this legislation is. But it's nice to have that partnership so we can work through it and gain that. And with that, I'd like to wrap it up, and hopefully we can answer some questions, and anything that I missed, it's certainly going to be a pleasure to answer those questions.
Well, thank you both for great overviews. You mentioned the community service officers, Cary, and that they're non-police officers. What kind of training and how do you recruit these individuals?
With our police officers, when they come out of PTI, they go through a 16-week, what we call a field training. They go into field training for 16 weeks. They're teamed with the experienced officer that's trained to train these new recruits at different phases. So we took that and kind of condensed that down to a community service officer program. So they're learning the geography, they're learning the radio traffic, they're learning how to write reports. We've gone through some CIT training with them, some basic self-defense training with them. So we're preparing them to be the face of the police department when dealing with those low-level calls for service. So this is a very new program. We've recruited via social media and other methods to get good candidates. They go through several interview panels. They go through their background checks, their psychologicals, and their medical. So they're prepared to be on shift and they're out on patrol. So they have a condensed version of our field training program as what we do with our police officers. We currently have 4 now, but we're hoping to expand that.
Is this a program that Champaign and Urbana police departments are considering as well, or is this specific to UIPD?
Yeah, they're earlier. They got our information in Champaign, so they like the program. I think maybe you may see that in, I can't say how long, but they're actually taking a serious look. I think it'd be a vital asset to our community.
Super. I think I'm looking at the chat and there's some extensive questions here, which we'll get to all of them. But for Michael, does the PTI train new recruits and techniques of de-escalation when confronted with verbally agitated subjects? Empty-handed was also included.
And the answer is yes. And like I was saying before, one of the biggest things we do, and we do the most of, is that within our scenario-based training, that, whether it's just somebody angry or it could be somebody that's, very agitated and threatening, but the goal is to still de-escalate the situation. And so we are constantly working on de-escalation techniques, and like I said before, non-escalation techniques. And it's nice watching the recruits throughout the 12 weeks or soon to be 16 weeks next year, but to watch them progress and to watch them with somebody just yelling and screaming at them, and maybe they made an investigative stop for somebody that matches the description of somebody that committed a crime. Person may or may not have committed the crime, but I've got that reasonable suspicion or reasonable grounds to stop that person, and the person's really angry. And then they'll learn the techniques. Sir, I can see you're upset. I would be too. If I could, I'm not saying you had anything to do with this. If I could just take a look at and get your ID from you, I can get you on your way a lot quicker, and just not to take things personal. And I think an important part of de-escalation training is to understand that when we go to a situation as officers, people are angry. They are going to take it out on us, but it's not really directed at us. They're mad at the situation. They're mad at themselves. We have to have some empathy for people, knowing that they do have, drug problems, alcohol problems, relationship problems, financial problems, and you're getting called when things are at their worst. So our job through our words, through our tone of voice, through all these things is to work on de-escalating, and they get a lot of practice. And it's really nice to see them, evolve through that process throughout the time.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, police officers' families, as well as the police officers, live with anxieties that most others don't experience. Correct. Do any current training programs include spouses and or families to help them understand the risks and or to help them learn techniques to cope with the ongoing tensions that a police officer
Yes.
encounter?
Yeah, so up until COVID, and we're bringing it back now, but up until COVID, every class, the day they graduate, the recruits are in the building. They're taking their 188 or whatever question exam, state exam that they have to pass. And in that morning, we have a venue where I talk to them. I talk to them about policing. I talk to them about police stress. I talk to them and the training they went through and things to expect and how to cope with and manage, as a police officer's, spouse or mother or father or whatever. And so it's been a very successful program. We didn't do it during COVID, but we're bringing that back. And, a lot of the things that, we use, there's a guy named Professor Gil Martin, Emotional Survival book. And there's several things out there. We'll make reading recommendations to them. And I feel kind of weird recommending my book, but it's also a good book on wellness and ethics and resilience. But yeah, so we're bringing that back, and I think people have a really good understanding, of what they're getting into. And I always tell them, I can just add,
Sure.
we know that it's important that police families understand the stress that recruits are going through. But my recruits and police officers need to understand that they also need to be there for their spouse. They're going through things too. It's just different things. It's not, oh, woe is me. I need all the, oh, I'm the cop. No, it's still that partnership. It's still being there for each other. And, it's not a cop out. Yes, pun intended. So, that's a lot of it, but it's about a 3-hour talk and answering questions, and that's been pretty successful.
And there are spousal support groups. Actually, my husband's started one here where the spouses get together, and then they kind of have a roundtable about, what it's like to live with a police officer and some of the stresses. And it's very helpful for them to engage with one another and know that they're experiencing the same things. And so they have each other to turn to. So that spousal support group is very, very helpful.
Well, somewhat connected with that would be, we're all aware of the tragedy around Officer Oberheim. Was it only last year, 2 years ago? And high profile his family has played. But a question was asked: what effect has Officer Oberheim's death had on training local officers and conducting traffic stops at night? I'm not sure that was actual traffic stop, but get the gist of that.
Well, traffic stops are one of the most dangerous things that any police officer can do, because it's all the unknown. You don't know who or what you're walking into. So, trainings, what Mike does in his scenario training is best prepare the officer for different aspects and how to approach the car. And, always expect the unexpected. You always want to see the hands when you're in a vehicle. So if you see the hands, you know that they don't have a third hand to grab a gun or something. But that's very important that our officers know that that's a risk they're taking, and having that training to rely on is something that will save their lives.
Yeah, and I think there's certain calls you'll go on where it's like, yes, I realize this could be a high risk situation. I got a call, shooting, man with a gun, somebody robbed a bank. But we, just like traffic stops, just like vehicle stops, going on a domestic, and domestic disputes could be very, very violent. And it's so we train for those, and we can't prevent every bad thing from happening. And as far as that actual incident, I'm at this point, knowing him, I'm not really comfortable talking about that specifically.
Okay. Well, speaking of violence and guns, how do you both feel about the relatively easy access to guns, not just in our community, but nationwide? And do you support the reform of gun laws?
I don't know if I'm going to be the same as you, Chief, or not, but this is from me, Mike, not necessarily from PTI. I think guns are a huge problem. I think there's some guns out there that I don't see any use for a civilian to have. I think that people that own guns should, be vetted, and not everybody should have them. And, I support the red flag idea. And so I think that, guns in the wrong hands are dangerous. And I think certain weapons I just don't see. So, and I'm not speaking for the voice of all police.
Chief Cary, did you want to comment further?
Well, it's the responsible gun owners, we can't, penalize them for doing the right things, and I think a lot of our issues are illegal guns or stolen guns. So, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, there are too many guns out there. And I agree with Mike in a lot of those aspects too. It's this red flag law that was, something that I think is going to save some lives. And I support that as well. But there's a lot of work to be done on these gun laws. And I do think there's a lot of these guns that, why do people need these? So we can't blanket that. We really need to take a deep dive into these gun laws and see if we can help people from losing their lives, because it's not just the guns in the street. They're killing people, but people are dying because they have access to a gun and they kill themselves, or children get their hands on a weapon and accidentally kill themselves. So there's a lot of different.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But there's a lot of different factors when it comes to guns. And so there's a lot of different layers that we really need to take a deep dive in.
We have a question about threat assessment meeting, a term that was in the news. That term was used this week in relation to the shootings at the University of Virginia. Can you explain what that might entail?
Yeah, we have both a threat assessment and a behavioral health or behavioral intervention team. So a threat assessment, when it rises, there's some suspicion of someone maybe, acting out. It may be a social media post. It may be something a roommate or a friend or something has observed some abnormal behavior. So it's a team of, it's a multidisciplinary, I can't even say it tonight, it's late. But it's a team comprised of different members of the community, campus community, that get together and they assess the threat in and of itself. There's, clinicians on there, and there's other members that student affairs and the police department who can, take that farther as to getting in and digging in behind why that person is, saying or acting in that way, and provides intervention for that individual. So we've had some success stories because of what people has reported, or that behavior has been reported to the threat assessment.
When an incident like that happens at the University of Virginia, a horrible incident, are police officers within the university environment? I imagine you have a lot of professional connections. Do your radar go up immediately in something like that? And you maybe also talk to the football team here about issues along those lines or something? It was so specific to the population on campus.
Yeah, and that's details are still evolving on the why, because he was on the bus along with the other individuals. But we do have a football liaison person that is with the football team. He's a police officer, and he provides a resource for them. So he's making those contacts every day. He travels with the team, so he's there for them for that specific reason.
piece. What PTI teaches seems extremely reasonable. That's good to know. Do we see a reduction in violence or better outcomes in some other way as a result of these training practices, newer practices?
Yeah, I think it's very important the way we train officers. And I think if we train them the correct way, that there could be a reduction in certain outcomes and, bad outcomes. But it's not just the verbal, it's actual tactics. So if I think of a couple of incidents where I think, even though it was one where it was a lawful shoot, but I think it could have been prevented. And that's if everybody's familiar with Tamir in Cleveland, the young man with the gun in the park. And if you watch that video, you see officers pull up, immediately get out of their car, go around to where he's at. He retrieves the gun, which was a toy gun, but you can't tell because it was one of the training guns with the training part, the red part torn off. And that was considered a perception of death, a fear of death or great bodily harm. But there's tactics that we teach. So here's the tactic there. Distance plus cover equals time. And I just wonder if the officers would have pulled further away, got behind the engine block that stops bullets, gave commands, would Tamir still be alive today? So there's tactics too. And another one I think about is Sandra Bland. Is everybody familiar with Sandra Bland? And then she committed suicide. I think she could be alive today if that officer would have followed our vehicle stop tactics, our verbal tactics that we used. And to me, if you watch that, if you haven't seen it, you can watch it. But it's like, as soon as, in my opinion, as soon as she would not put out her cigarette, he took it personal. And then he's going to pull her out of the car. Things got worse. He arrested her and then she committed suicide. It was for a minor traffic violation. If I'm stopping somebody and they're smoking a cigarette, I don't think I'm going to get lung cancer with their window open, me interviewing them for a few minutes and giving them their warning citation or whatever, and appreciate your cooperation. And so there's just, it's not just the de-escalation, it's a big part of it, but it's also just the strategy and tactics and how I approach and just being smart about all of those things. Did that answer the question? Maybe.
I believe so.
Okay.
Besides lectures, what other methods used to communicate new ideas and ways of doing police work? What other methods are used to communicate new ideas and ways of doing police work to it's, I think you probably covered much of
Are you
that.
talking about at PTI?
Right.
Yeah, I think that probably one of the biggest things that we do is we really grasp on to the adult learning model. The adult learning model has been around a long time. Malcolm Knowles, I think 1968 or whatever, but we are able to understand, that things need to be relevant and how, the motivation is intrinsic, and how can we use this adult learning model to get them to become critical thinkers, right? Not just this is you do this, you do this, you do this. It's like, okay, so if I'm facilitating a scenario properly, then I am able to get them to think critically about everything that's going on. So it's how we teach things. We train our facilitators, we train our role players, and even in a classroom, if we can prevent it from just being death by PowerPoint, we want them to interact. We want them to be a part of the training. We want to put them in groups. We want to have discussions. We want to challenge them. And I think we do a good job of that. And that's so important in any learning. And so I think that's probably one of the things that we do really well.
Alice, in terms of continuing education with the current officers, can you talk a little bit about how that takes place within your unit?
Yeah, we have mandatory training. And so our officers have, a certain number of hours that they have to continue their education that way. But we have a training plan, so we like to get our officers into specialty units based on, what their likes are. So we can get someone into like they like behavioral health officers. So we want to find training for that individual to bolster their skill by finding those trainings for that officer. So, or an officer likes control tactics, or, so we'll get that officer into that, or they like firearms and they can become a firearms instructor. So we try to specialize that training for the interests of the officers and get them into the trainings in addition to the mandatory state trainings that the officers have to go through each year.
Is the situation, maybe particularly for the Champaign Police Department, to the point now where they are fully staffed? Is the recruitment of officers a difficult thing in these challenging times?
I think, I think we're doing well. I think the Champaign is doing well in filling these positions. And part of it too, it almost takes a year by the time you interview an individual for a position of police officer, by the time they get through the PTI training and their field training at the department. It's about a year before you have a police officer that can go out on their own. So it takes time. If you get what we call a lateral officer that comes from another police department that's certified, they still have to go through training, but that's much shorter. So you can get that individual out on the street much quicker. I think locally here, and I personally have not had issues in finding people wanting to come to the U of I. And I think Champaign with the new chief is getting really good candidates as well. I'm not sure exactly where Urbana is at, but I think we're all in pretty good shape, or heading in the right direction, I should say.
Does that appear to be the case within the state, Michael?
It varies from agency to agency. I've talked to some chiefs and sheriffs in some of the larger counties or cities around the state. We PTI trains over 800 agencies. And I was talking to a sheriff recently, and he said, we used to get 500 people that would apply for the job, and this time we got 50. So there's some places where it's significantly less people, and then out of that, you have your psychological, your background checks and all these other things, and then it gets reduced even more. But one thing I can say, even though there's less that are applying, the young, well, I don't want to say young, they're different ages, but the recruit officers we're getting, I feel like that, we're getting people that want to do the job for the right reasons, right? I want to help people that can't help themselves. I want to protect those that can't protect themselves. I want to be a part of the community. And I want to be the new regime where our goal is to gain back the trust of citizens that we have lost. And that's kind of a common theme throughout. It's like, I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm ready to do that. And so, I feel good about the recruit officers we're getting today.
There's a question concerning the Minneapolis situation, and I guess that also kind of links to was there a decline in the ability to recruit police officers when the George Floyd issue occurred, but more specifically, has the PTI eliminated from training the restraining technique of applying full weight and a knee against a person's neck?
We've never had that. So I wish I could demonstrate it, but I'll just try to explain it. So how we restrain somebody on the ground, if you can picture this, I have my one knee on the ground. If their armpit, almost all my weight is there. I have the other shin going across their back toward their hip, not on the neck, on the back, with some weight on it. I can control that arm and get the cuffs on. We've always taught it that way. We've never taught anything where you apply all the pressure on the back, and we've never had anything where you apply pressure on the neck. And I do believe that was taught in some states, but yeah, we've never done that. And the first thing we do, it's automatic. Recruits maybe will practice taking somebody down and controlling them and get the cuffs on. And as soon as they get the cuffs on, it's so automatic. Hey, are you okay? Can you breathe? I mean, that's just so automatic for our recruits. And if somebody's saying, I can't breathe, years ago, I used to hear officers say, well, you wouldn't be able to talk if you wouldn't be able to talk if you can't breathe. And really what they're trying to say is I'm having difficulty breathing. They're not going to tell you that. If they say, I can't breathe, we immediately get them up. We immediately call for EMS. We immediately do these different things and maybe even taking the cuffs off. So that is our number one thing, that it's just like, boom, clockwork, down on the ground, cuffs on. Are you okay? Can you breathe? No weight on them at all. Get them up, sit them up. And it's just, they get reps and then they got it.
Mhm. Do any of the students question or push back on that PTI training techniques? If so, what are their concerns?
No, I think that they understand that they're effective control holds, effective standing controls, effective controlling somebody on the ground. And you can do so much without harming somebody if you learn how to control somebody. And if I could just add to that, that this may sound counterintuitive, but the better an officer is at their tactics, their physical tactics of control and arrest tactics. That's the control is huge. And now there's a big surge, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with jujitsu, but jujitsu is a gentle art. I mean, they do have other submissions and things like that, but minus those things, if I can learn to have these certain control holds on people where I know how to use my body mechanics instead of my muscle or and be able to control them, because if I can control them, it's going to not end up getting up and then it's a fight and then it's somebody grabbing somebody's taser and then they're running down, and then you guys know what I'm talking about. If two officers there or one officer can get control of that person and keep that from escalating into where they have to use more force than necessary. And that's where we need more ongoing training for officers. And it's just hard to do with the, with the budgets and things like that. But that's something I've really been pushing for.
Thank you. I think we'll go with one last question here. How do police officers feel about the co-responder model? What do they see as the benefits or drawbacks of partnering with social work?
Well, when we first introduced social workers, we were like, oh, what are they here for? Officers hate change, so now that we have 3 on board, when they're not on shift, it's the first police officer to go, where's the social worker? We really need a social worker. So they really love the program. They really learn, have depended on our social workers now because they see their expertise, they see what they can do. And so they love having them around. So if I could hire more, I'm going to hire more because of that. And they really are making a world of difference in taking police out of those calls. We're just there to make sure that scene's safe, but letting our experts handle the mental health issues and the calls for service as it relates to mental illness.
Do I have one time to add one thing to that?
Sure.
So yeah, that reminds me, I guess maybe we should have mentioned, Alice, that our collaboration on the police and social worker co-responder model academy, where people are now coming from all over the state, and it's the social worker comes with the officer they're working with, and they have a chance to learn how to coordinate what the strategy and tactics and what to expect from each other, so that it can be safer and it can work so much better. And getting great praise of that. We've had 2 so far, and it's just I think it's people coming from all over the state. So I'm gonna give Alice credit for that, her idea. I just helped.
A lot.
Wow. It's your cookout. I was just there for the barbecue.
Well, please join me in thanking Director Schlosser and Chief Cary for an informative hour of conversation. And thank you for zooming in this evening. So let's give a round of applause there. And stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah. Bye-bye.
See you soon, Chief.
See you, Mike.